Hey guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well and happy Valentine's Day. Now, depending on when I'm posting this video on my channel, this could either be a Valentine's Day gift for 2024 or a very, very early gift for 2025. But hopefully I get this video up on Wednesday because I'm super excited to dive into this topic with you guys, because for today's video, we are going to be discussing the phenomenon that is interracial relationships in the media, particularly in Hollywood productions. This is going to be exciting, juicy, and perhaps a little bit controversial. But I thought I would dive into this topic because I've been observing things. You guys have also observed things, which some of you have commented on my videos over the years. So I thought it was time. And what better occasion than on the day of love itself, hopefully, if I post this on Wednesday. Now, before we dive into today's video, as this is a little bit more of a controversial topic, I do have a couple of disclaimers. First of all, okay, and because of the controversial nature of this topic, you guys might have some visceral reactions to what we discussed today, and that's absolutely fine. I love hearing your thoughts, feelings, observations. This is one of the reasons why I'm making this video to begin with, so please feel free to share them. I just ask that you be respectful. I just ask that you be respectful and kind. There's no need to insult people. There's no need to be angry. I only say this because I'm still licking my wounds from some of the comments under my Mr. and Mrs. Smith review, which has gone a little bit out of hand. Okay, so if you do have thoughts, feelings, emotions about this topic, I would love to hear them as always, but just keep it respectful, por favor. And the second thing to note is that I'm going to be diving into the topic in relation to Hollywood and media and representation in media. This isn't me doing a sociology video. This isn't a research video essay, okay, with the likes of like Khadija and Bawe. Like, we're not doing that today. We're not doing that today, I'm afraid. Apologies if that's what you thought it was, but I'm not Khadija. I'm not Khadija, and we're not going to be talking about this issue in the context of wider society. We're focusing on media representation. Which brings me to my last disclaimer, and that is my general thoughts on interracial relationships, so that you guys know the headspace that I'm going into this with. And like I said, we are diving into representation in media for this video, but just so you guys know, just so you guys understand where I'm coming from, okay? I personally think that this world is so gruesome. It's so traumatic, horrific, terrifying, disappointing, miserable, chaotic, maddening, okay? Like, all these are the horrible adverbs that if you can find love, if you can find affection, romance, sensuality, friendship, anywhere you go, if you can find that, treasure it, hold it close to your heart. To me, it does not matter the race, creed, religion, etc. of the person that it's coming from, so long as you are both in a good place. So I am not one of those people that's like, don't date outside of your race, blah blah blah. I've never believed that personally. I've never believed that, and I also don't come from a family that believes that either. But yeah, that's the position that I'm coming from. I think love can be so beautiful, so nourishing, and like I said, the rest of this world can be hellish and awful and destructive. So why would I shut down the opportunity for love? But like I said, we're not diving into my personal preferences today. This is going to be a talk on what's been going on in Hollywood. And so let's get to it. But before we do, as per usual, if you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to my channel and make sure you turn on notifications so that you can be told when I upload next. So now, without further ado, guys, let's dive into Hollywood's swirl agenda. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, swirl is a slang, or maybe it's AAVE term for an interracial relationship, and it's predominantly used towards relationships that have one black person and a white person, but it can apply to a range of different interracial relationships. And when it comes to, Hollywood's depiction of interracial relationships, we need to look back in time in American history, because because over 50 years ago in 1967, the Supreme Court's decision in Loving v. Virginia legalized interracial marriage in the US. And funnily enough, just 2 weeks later, shooting had been completed on a film that was on this very same topic, a film that you may have heard of, one by the name of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, which starred Spencer Tracy, Catherine Horton, and Sidney Poitier. So this was one of the very first films tackling the topic of interracial relationships. There had previously been interracial relationships depicted in films, but they didn't really explore this topic in a more overt way, the way that this film did. Now, interestingly, this film was actually remade in the early 2000s, and this time it starred Ashton Kutcher and Zoe Saldana. And unfortunately, this is the only version of the film that I have seen. But what's interesting about this is you could probably tell they kind of swapped the roles, where this time around you had the white male in the relationship and a POC woman. And there's a reason for that, but more on that later. But overall, when it comes to Hollywood history, even though they've definitely made strides when it comes to representation of underrepresented ethnic groups and racial groups, one of the things that they have been hesitant to tackle in Tinseltown has always been interracial relationships. For decades, even after this film that came out in the 60s, we scarcely saw interracial relationships be depicted in mainstream Hollywood films. But that has all changed, as many of us have noticed, especially in the last 10 years with this streaming era that Hollywood is going through. I tend to find that a lot of the interracial relationships that we get in media come from TV shows, and more specifically streaming shows. And I think that might be because streaming shows tend to be more tailor-made for specific audiences. Sometimes they're even whipped up by algorithms, okay, to be tailored to specific audiences. And as a result, you tend to see some streaming shows taking more chances or risks in comparison to, you know, mainstream shows on cable, or even films that are theatrically released. And of course, it makes sense that streamers would be more willing to take certain risks with their productions, because at the end of the day, the main product for a streamer is the streaming platform. You're not paying for the individual productions on that platform. Instead, you're paying for the whole package. And so they want to sell you that package, and they want to keep you there to prevent churning every single month. And so that's why it's in their best interest to cater these productions to you as much as possible. Whereas you have a completely different model with traditional television, where you're trying to get as many eyes on this production as possible because you want to sell that advertising. And similarly with feature films, it's also a numbers game. They're trying to sell as many tickets as possible. And when it does eventually go to VOD, you are going to be buying each individual unit of that production, and so it's in their best interest to sell as many as possible there. So that's why streamers tend to be a little bit more, you know, willing to take risks, to be edgier, to have greater representation, and it's something that I've definitely been enjoying. But you need to understand that it's built into their business model, and it works for their best interest to do so. They're not doing it out of the kindness of their own hearts, and that applies to every single aspect of Hollywood, including its representation of underrepresented groups. So now I'm going to show you guys some recent examples of interracial relationships depicted in the media, but I wanted to split these up into various categories because they do kind of have groups. But the two major categories that I want you guys to note, because this is relevant to our conversation, is one, the couples where one of the love interests is white, and two, the couples where both love interests are people of color. And as you can already predict, as you can already imagine, category 1 is certainly more represented than category 2. So I'm going to show you guys examples of category 1, okay? Enjoy! And then we have some examples of category 2. So as I said, and as many of you guys have likely observed, category 1, where one of the love interests is white, tends to make up the vast majority of the types of interracial relationships that we get in Hollywood. But why is that? You can probably guess why, but we'll talk about it nonetheless. And the main reason is because it kind of allows Hollywood to have their cake and eat it too. Depending on the nature of the story, you can have the case where you have a POC character who is the main character, who is the lead in the production, but they have a white partner or love interest. Or you can have a case where you have a white lead character who happens to have a POC love interest. Either way, this is an opportunity for Hollywood to, like I said, have their cake and eat it too. You have the representation of the POC character, whether you're delving into that character's racial or ethnic identity or not. The character is there, they tick the box, but also they have the sort of safety net of the white character, and that's exactly how Hollywood views it. They want to cast, like I said, as wide a net as possible, and one way that they like to do this is by ensuring that there is some sort of representation of whiteness in as many productions as possible, even the productions that are centered on POC stories. Now, in the context of romance movies or TV shows, which is what I'm largely focusing on today, because it's Valentine's Day, hopefully, this is especially important because you have your POC romantic lead and then you have your white lead. So you're essentially able to draw in multiple types of audiences. You have the POC audience, like for instance, if you have a black lead, then you're drawing in the black audience, and then you're also able to draw in more of a white audience, which Hollywood obviously wants, as they're, based in a white majority country. But just digging a little bit into the psychology of why these audiences are drawn in, it's really interesting, because if you do have, say, a black female lead and a white male lead, you're drawing in the black audience who obviously wants to watch the story of a black character and is interested in that, okay. But then you're also drawing in a black audience who wants to see the black female lead, not just, living her life and having her story, but also being the object of desire. Oh, let's talk about it. Desirability politics, okay? But yes, that definitely plays a role. You'll have members of the audience, including myself. I would absolutely be, in this group. Members of the audience who would be eager to see this black female lead be desired by someone, and not just someone, not just anyone, okay, but a white man. Now, some of you guys will cringe, some of you guys will cry, some of you guys will scream at me saying this, but listen to this, because this is the psychology, this is what's really happening. But yes, it definitely does make a difference that this black female lead would be seen as desirable by this white man, who in our white majority societies is considered the very, very top of the white supremacist hierarchy. And those members of the audience would feel like they're living vicariously through the black female lead, especially if they are black women themselves or women of color. And it may not be that they are particularly attracted to that man or to any white man, but it is that idea of the power dynamics that we encounter in our societies every single day that are subconsciously affecting the way that we view the world all the time, kind of playing into the kinds of stories and media that we want to see. Think about how people react to Kerry Washington and Tony Goldwyn's relationship, both on and off screen. Of course, first of all, they are the king and queen of on-screen chemistry, like literally no one else can touch them. But two, there is also that element, that novelty of Kerry Washington being a black woman and Tony Goldwyn being a white man. But then on the flip side, when it comes to white audiences, which for this genre that we're largely talking about, it would be white women, well, they would be able to relate to this black female character character to some extent because they also find the white male lead attractive. So they would be able to live vicariously through that black female character and identify with her a little bit more, way more than they would be able to if she was attracted to a black man, because then the white audience is completely shut out, right? Like they are completely out of this relationship. They're just in the periphery on the outside looking in. But if you give them the in the form of the white male lead, then they're able to link up to this character and therefore the story and therefore the production a lot more. So that at least is like the theory behind the psychology of why Hollywood tends to choose the casting that it does for these interracial relationships, despite the fact that, you know, a huge proportion of interracial relationships in America don't even involve a white person. In fact, a 2017 study found that about a third of interracial relationships didn't have any white person in there. It was a relationship between two other minority groups. But you wouldn't think that, considering the types of interracial relationships that we see depicted in Hollywood, because oftentimes they are centered on one white character. Now, another important thing to note, and it's something that I hinted at earlier when I was talking about Guess Who Came to Dinner and the early 2000s remake, but oftentimes when we do get interracial couples depicted on screen and, you know, one of them is a white person, that white person tends to be the man. The configuration of interracial relationships that we tend to get in media is with a white man and a POC woman, oftentimes a black woman, but that's become much more varied in recent years. And this is no accident. That's also rooted in white supremacist, racist rhetorics, okay, and beliefs. And the key one being the idea of, you know, maintaining purity and white purity through white mothers and white motherhood, and how if a white woman is to date outside of her race, particularly, you know, when it came to black men, because of America's history of slavery, then she was a race traitor, first of all, but also that black man, that scary, aggressive, subhuman black man would be defiling her, would be deflowering her and ruining her purity, making her impure and just vile. And so this idea of a black man, a scary black man, sort of, you know, ruining a white woman and the purity that she holds has been perpetuated in extremely racist rhetoric. But unfortunately, because of how this industry and society works, even though this vivid image is still to this day perpetuated in extremely, you know, right-wing neo-Nazi communities, a sort of watered-down version still traverses the hallways of Tinseltown. Because even though people in Hollywood may not always hold these aggressively vile views, they do still believe that there's more friction in seeing a man of color, and particularly a black man, with a white woman than vice versa. And there have been studies done of this showing that audiences feel more comfortable. White audiences feel more comfortable with, you know, white man and POC women versus the other way round. And of course, because of the cheeky, cute little phenomenon of colorism, yes, because of our cis colorism, the darker skinned the man, the more uneasy these white audiences feel. And finally, before we dive into some of the arguments, you know, discussing the issues of this phenomenon, the last trend that I couldn't help but note is to do with category 2. Finally, we're getting to category 2. Okay, I haven't forgotten. And category 2 is, of course, where you have two people of color who are from different racial or ethnic backgrounds. And the major trend that I've seen here is that oftentimes category 2 is the type of interracial relationship that you will see depicted by POC filmmakers and storytellers. Oftentimes when you have a production that is, you know, mostly kind of spearheaded by a white filmmaker or storyteller, you will have one white person in the couple, versus if you have a POC team or mind behind that production, it's more likely that the couple will be two POC people. But again, category 2 overall is far more scarce than category 1. But there are, of course, some exceptions, like for instance, Kumail Nanjiani's The Big Sick, which was the story of how he met his actual wife, who is Caucasian. And of course, a major exception is anything to do with Mindy Kaling. Anything to do with Mindy Kaling. Because best believe she'll have a white boy in there somewhere. Okay, so now let's dive into some of the discussions that people have as a result of these trends and what they're observing in Hollywood. I have seen a couple of comments throughout the years about this, and I think the major issue that people have when it comes to the lack of representation of mono-ethnic couples, where, you know, both of the couples of the same race or ethnicity, is the fact that you lose that ability to center the story, you know, on that underrepresented group solely. Like I said, when you introduce a white character into that couple dynamic, inevitably you have less of a focus on that, you know, POC character, and that's by design because, you know, business-wise, Hollywood thinks that's the best way forward. But when it comes to representation, oftentimes people feel that it's like watering down that representation, especially if the production is supposed to be focused on the POC character who is supposed to be the lead. That's not to say that every single one of these romance movies and TV shows always have to have a sort of racial discussion element in there. That's not to say that in the slightest, although we could stand to have a few more that have that because they're very, very few and far between. Okay, so yeah, we could stand to see a little bit more of that from Hollywood at least. But also, even barring the discussions of racial issues and whatnot, the prevalence of the category 1 configuration of interracial relationships, where you have one white character in there, is kind of a misrepresentation of the landscape of interracial relationships in real life. Because just going off of what the media shows us, you would think at least 90%, 99% of interracial relationships involve some kind of white person. And you would also think that more often than not, it would be a white man and a POC woman. And of course, we're talking in heteronormative terms, but we will get to queer relationships in a second. But that's not the case at all. That's literally not even the case in real life, because in actuality, studies and statistics have shown time and time again that POC men are far more likely to marry outside of their race and ethnicity than POC women. For instance, when it comes to black men in America and here in the UK, they're more than 2 times more likely to marry outside of their race than black women. In the US, you literally have almost 3 times the amount of black men marrying outside of their race than black women have. But again, you wouldn't be able to tell that from the media and the way that it represents these relationships, and that is, of course, because of those extremely racist views and ideologies that stem from hundreds and hundreds of years that kind of underpins all of this. And that's obviously a major issue, because if Hollywood really wants to have more interracial relationships in productions to better represent society today, then they would properly reflect on what actual society looks like, so that it can have that more well-rounded representation. But instead, it's still being led by these backwards ideologies that unfortunately are underpinned by white supremacism. And even aside from these cultural and creative effects of this trend, you also have the more practical side, where if you have more movies and TV shows with 2 POC characters, you're giving more POC actors a job. Like, whereas with this more persistent trend, it feels like Hollywood is still trying to keep the white actors, particularly the white male actors, as employed as possible. They're like, we have to do this representation thing, okay, whatever, but we still need to have someone. We still need to have a white man on the cast list, because otherwise what will we do? The whole industry will fall, the whole world will crumble. So yeah, it feels like the top priority in Hollywood is always to make sure a white man has a job by any means necessary. But then of course we have the matter of the depiction of LGBTQ relationships. Now, I've been speaking largely in heteronormative terms. My apologies, this this is because of my own ignorance when it comes to LGBTQ relationships, but also because the vast majority of romantic relationships that we see depicted in Hollywood are still very heteronormative. But we are increasingly getting more LGBTQ representation, and with that, some romantic relationships are being seen, which is wonderful. But the problem is that, similarly to the heterosexual interracial relationships that we're getting in the media, these LGBTQ relationships also tend to have one white character in there somewhere, okay? It's very rare to see LGBTQ relationships with two POC characters, and that is a huge shame. That's even worse of a loss because of how little representation this group gets to begin with. But to have so little variety on top of that is a real issue. And it's also a missed opportunity because with the depiction of two POC characters, you have the opportunity to dive into two different cultures and the intersectionality between culture or religion or ethnicity and sexuality as well. And that's not to say that every single production surrounding LGBTQ characters who are also POCs needs to be about that, but the fact that we rarely get it at all, like I actually can't think of an example okay, the fact that we never get it is a problem. And on top of everything, the undercurrent to this whole discussion is that, of course, the point of representation to begin with, which is that it can be really reaffirming and comforting and important for people to see themselves on screen so they can relate, you know, to those experiences depicted in film or television, or if they can't relate to that, to be able to learn about those things, to be exposed to them so that they become less alien and terrifying. And that does have material benefits to society at large, as we have seen across the decades that Hollywood has existed. And to be fair, I do think that whilst these interracial couples with one white love interest do come with some issues, I think that kind of representation is also just as valuable. The problem isn't that it exists, it's the fact that it dominates this entire field so substantially. Like, if there was a better balance of the types of representation of interracial couples that we get, then there wouldn't be a problem at all. But it is worth mentioning just how dominant category 1 is in the field of interracial relationships in Hollywood. Although, on a final note, just to get you even more jazzed up than you already are, okay, just to get your blood pumping even more, I do have to mention that even in productions where you do have two POC characters as the love interests, it's worth noting, it's worth observing that oftentimes we see a trend there as well, where the female character in these heteronormative relationships tends to be lighter skinned than the male character. That's, of course, our bestie colorism coming back to give us a nice warm hug. Happy Valentine's Day! But it's gonna have to be a hug goodbye, because that is in fact the end of today's discussion. But now that I've told you guys my thoughts on this phenomenon, Hollywood's swirl agenda, it's time for you guys to let me know what you think of this phenomenon down in the comments below. This is gonna be interesting. Please be kind. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up, and also be sure to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I might make more videos of this kind. But in the meantime, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.